A young woman named Amara rides on a large gargant beast. She wears the clothes and collar of a common slave, appearing harmless to the common eye. However, her eyes turn to the man walking alongside her. Fidelius is her teacher, for Amara is presently undergoing her graduation exercise to become a cursor of the Aleran Empire. The general public believes cursors are the letter carriers of the Empire, when in reality they act as the intelligence operatives of the First Lord, Gaius Sextus. Fidelius and Amara are tracking a rogue legion, posing as sellers of ore. They aim to see if the legion is under the command of one of the High Lords of the Empire, who may be seeking to overthrow Sextus. As they approach the camp, a tall, massive warrior melts out of the trees on the side of the road. Nearly 7 feet tall, it is evident he is a skilled Fury crafter, possessing elemental powers that allowed him to remain in hiding until they reached his position. Fidelius takes the lead, posing as a nervous merchant. The soldier orders them to follow him, more Fury crafters appearing in the trees as Fidelius and Amara pass through. It is a casual, unassuming display of strength, indicating the Legion may very well have a full contingent of knights. This, in turn, means the Legion may have powerful patrons in the Alera nobility. Amara is forced to remain silent as they reach the main camp, a massive, sprawling complex. The soldier insists the Gargant stay on the outskirts to avoid spooking the horses, and Fidelius and Amara grudgingly follow him deeper inside the camp. As they pass through, it becomes evident the camp is a well-oiled military operation, and additionally, Fidelius has recognized their escort. His name is Aldrich X Gladius, a legendary swordsman and the greatest duelist alive. Aldrich leads them to the commander's tent and disappears inside. He comes back and instructs Fidelius to enter alone, with Amara to remain outside. A haggard, emaciated slave girl is thrown outside the tent at Amara's feet. She introduces herself as Odiana and leads Amara away to show her the camp. Odiana has been tasked with washing several dishes, and they head to a stream. She opens the basket, and a piece of paper flutters outside. Amara grabs it and reads it, her heart racing. It contains marching orders for the Legion, issued by the High Lord of Attica, Atticus Quentin. It is an act of rebellion and war, but then Odiana speaks up. She has been watching Amara's reaction and has guessed she is a cursor. Odiana strikes, kicking Amara in the chin with surprising strength. She falls into the stream, and water suddenly rushes into her nose and mouth. Amara scrambles to the bank and looks up to see Odiana physically transforming into a beautiful woman. She is a powerful watercrafter for the Legion, and has undoubtedly caught on to her and Fidelius's ploy. Amara passes out, and then awakens to find herself buried to her arms in earth. She recognizes that she is being held in the commander's tent, and looks over to see Fidelius beaten and trapped in an iron cage suspended off the floor. Amara tries to call on her wind fury Cirrus, but the earth surrounding her mutes her powers. Fidelius likewise cannot reach his Furies Eton or Bama. He seems resigned to their defeat and capture, but Amara refuses to give up. Odiana and Aldrich arrive, and take Fidelius's cage outside. She hears a sword unsheathed, and Fidelius softly cry out. Tears run down Amara's face, and Odiana stoops down to comfort her. She then smashes dirt in Amara's eyes, and is restrained by Aldrich, who seems to be her lover. Aldrich then interrogates Amara, asking for intel on the inner chambers of the First Lord himself. She is shaken, but then realizes that their capture had been entirely too smooth. Amara steels herself, and raises her gaze to match Aldrich. You and your water witch can go to the crows, and so can you, Fidelius. Aldrich's face flickers with surprise, and then a very much alive Fidelius returns to the tent. He is collaborating with the Rogue Legion to Amara's disgust, and he asks to speak with her alone. Aldrich and Odiana depart, and the tent is silent for a moment. Fidelius then reveals that in his 40 years as a cursor, he has begun to see the slow decay of the crown. He doubts the strength of Gaius Sextus, an already old man with notably no heir to his name. Ever since the death of the Crown Prince Septimus, Fidelius has seen the writing on the wall. He believes the house of Gaius will fall, and asks Amara to join him. But Amara remains loyal to the crown and its ideals, and she spurns him. She watches him leave, palming a knife she has managed to steal from Fidelius's boot while they talk. Amara then manages to hack her way free, a surge of excitement rushing over her. However, the emotion is sensed by Odiana outside, who quickly warns Aldrich. The massive warrior bursts into the tent, and Amara grabs a sword and lunges, managing to nick him. But Aldrich's skill is too great, and he counters and cuts her arm. Amara leaps away, cutting through the tent and running out into the camp. She runs for the nearest wall as the guards close in on her. At last, though, Amara is able to call on her Fury Cirrus. She leaps off the wall and lands softly, racing into the woods surrounding the camp. With the wind and Cirrus at her back, she tries to leap into the air, but enemy Furies in the trees entangle her legs and obscure the sky from her sight. Amara fights on, continuing to run out of terror until she reaches a cliff. She jumps right off, taking to the air and flies away. She looks back and uses Cirrus to magnify her sight back at the cliff's edge. Aldrich is there, and he signals to several soldiers who immediately take off after her. They are enemy knights Eris, and Amara now knows her escape is not wholly over yet. And far away, in the valley of Calderon, the young Tavi quietly slips out of his room. He sneaks through the great hall of his home and makes for the courtyard of Bernard Holt. However, he immediately runs into his uncle Bernard, a former legionnaire with a wry smile on his face. Tavi blusters for a moment, claiming he was heading out to bring one of the flocks of sheep back in. He had put off the chore last night attempting to do a favor for a girl, and Bernard hides another smile. He tells Tavi the flock is his responsibility to care for as a man, and that the two of them must find it before the truth find at the Steadholt. Bernard refuses to use his Fury Brutus to track the flock, instead seeing it as a learning moment for Tavi. The boy is frustrated, for at 15 years old he is still Furyless, unable to manifest any powers of his own. It is unheard of for someone his age to not be able to channel anything at all, and has forced him to rely on his wits to navigate the harsh, unforgiving valley. Tavi and Bernard begin to track the flock, and soon near a footbridge. With his crafting, Bernard sees another stadtholder named Cord, with the sons Bitten and Eric hiding nearby. Bernard flushes them out, and the aggressive Cord confronts him. He calls Tavi a freak as his sons laugh, and they retreat back on the road to the Steadholt. Cord and his sons were likely planning to attack another stadtholder named Warner, whose family has accused Bitten of assaulting their daughter. Bernard Holt will be the site of the truth find and trial, meaning tensions will be high around Tavi's home for the time being. Bernard then drops a small button into the brook below the bridge, and asks another Fury called Rill to contact his sister Asana. Tavi's aunt answers, and is told of Cord's whereabouts. She also warns them a storm may be brewing from the nearby mountain of Gyarados, the great elemental fury of legend there. With the help of Livia blowing cold winds from the north will wreak havoc on the valley. Bernard and Tavi promise to make it back in time, and continue their search. Meanwhile, Asana settles into the morning preparations for the truth find as Cord and his sons arrive. She can sense the nervous tension and energy already brewing in the courtyard, her perceptions heightened by her strong talents in watercrafting. Asana, though no slouch in crafting, is notably unmarried and childless at 37, with her brother Bernard and her acting as the effective parents of Tavi. Then, the stadtholder Warner also arrives in the courtyard and immediately confronts Cord. Cord is brashly unapologetic for his son's actions, and openly dares Warner to duel in the Juris Macto. Bitten, not recognizing Asana, approaches her and arrogantly tries to touch her face. She calls upon her Fury Rill, and water suddenly bursts out of his nose and mouth. A furious Cord begins to summon his monstrous Earth Fury, but Asana talks him down and dispels Rill. Cord and his sons retreat to the barn, and Asana gathers herself. Then, Fade emerges, limping up to Asana with a cup of water and a clean cloth. He is mentally debilitated, and the left side of his face is disfigured with the brand of a coward. But Fade is a treasured companion and friend of Asana. He is devoted to her, Bernard, and Tavi, and promises to keep an eye on Cord in the barn. Elsewhere, Tavi is finally able to find the lost flock of sheep. As he reels them in, though, Tavi suddenly catches a whiff of blood. He finds the slaughtered remains of several sheep, and mysteriously none seem to have been killed by local predators of Calderon Valley. Bernard catches up to him and takes in the scene. He immediately turns deadly quiet, and tells Tavi they must leave. Suddenly, a tall bird with wicked talons bounds forwards and attacks them both. Its claws tear across Bernard's thigh, and Bernard calls upon his Fury Brutus to defend him. Tabby screams and picks up his uncle's fallen short sword. He strikes the bird in the neck as Brutus slams it into the ground, killing it. Bernard, however, is badly hurt. His connection to his Furies will be weakened, and he tells Tabby the terrifying bird was a herdbane. Unfortunately for Tabby and his uncle, though, the body of the bird reveals a collar of sorts around its neck. Bernard states it is of the Marat barbarians, enemies of Alera who have not been in Calderon Valley for years. The herdbane's Marat, as well as the bird's own mate, will undoubtedly be enraged. Bernard begins to lose consciousness and asks Brutus to transport him home. He passes out as the Fury lifts Tabby and Bernard up on a slab of stone. Tabby is frustrated his neglect has jeopardized their lives, also noticing darkening storm clouds beginning to whirl overhead. The storm is near, but to make matters worse, he hears several more high screeches. It is another herdbane, chilling Tabby's blood. He rolls off the slab of stone with Bernard as rain begins to fall. Tabby throws a stone into the brush on the side of the trail, and another herdbane emerges from the shadows. Then, another one appears, accompanied by a tall, powerful man Tabby knows to be one of the Marat. The Marat and the herdbanes find the dead mate, and seem to mourn for a brief moment. The Marat rises in anger, and whistles into the oncoming Fury storm. Another whistle is heard on the wind, and Tabby realizes the Marat are returning to Calderon Valley. The Marat then picks up Bernard's sword, and tastes the blood still staining the dead herdbane's claws. He then whips south, right in the direction of Bernard and the Stethold. Tabby then rises to his feet and hurls a stone at the Marat to distract the warrior from chasing his uncle. The Marat turns to face Tabby, who immediately runs away. Being smaller and more slender of a build, the boy easily navigates the brush as he races away from the Marat and herdbanes. Meanwhile, an exhausted Amara continues to fly towards safety, away from the knight's heiress still in pursuit. She reaches the River Gaul, and lands for a brief rest under cover. She pulls out a small copper coin and drops it into the waters. A Fury-crafted form of a noblewoman arises out of the river. It is Gaius Caria, wife to Gaius Sextus. She tells Amara the First Lord is busy with the management of the realm, and unhelpfully refuses to hear out Amara. Then, the river stirs again, and Sextus himself appears. His eyes are weary, and to Amara's eyes he seems very much the elder of Caria. Sextus, though not unkindly, dismisses his wife, who coldly vanishes with a splash. Their union had been of political necessity, and it is evident to Amara there is little love between the two. The First Lord, silvering hair marking his age of nearly 80 years old, asks for a report from Amara. He is unsurprised at Fidelius's betrayal, and reveals Amara was sent specifically on that mission to act as bait. Amara overcomes her initial anger, and then reports on the rogue legion. She and Sextus share the conclusion that the High Lord Atticus's name was a plant, but that it does seem there are at least 2 High Lords conspiring against the crown. Events are stirring all over Alera. I can feel it in my bones, girl. The march of feet, the restless migration of beasts. Already the behemoths sing in the darkness off the western coast, and the wild furies of the north country are preparing a cold winter this year. And voices speak loudly. Tension gathers in one place. The furies of earth and air and wood whisper everywhere that something dangerous is abroad, and that the peace our land has enjoyed these past 15 years nears its end. Metal furies hone the edges of swords and startle smiths at the forge. The rivers and the rains wait for when they shall run red with blood. And fire itself burns green of a night, or blue, rather than in scarlet and gold. Change is coming. Gaius Sextus tells Amara of Calderon Valley, notable for its strategic location between Alera and the plains beyond. It is a barrier against the Marat, the enemy of Alera whose attack 15 years ago killed the princeps of the realm. The First Lord believes events of utmost importance are unfolding in the valley concerning the Marat, believing the rogue High Lords may be working in concert with the barbarians. Amara is asked to head to the valley and to gather intel, to bring back concrete evidence the Marat have been hired by a High Lord. She agrees to the mission and prepares to set out again. Elsewhere, the traitor Cursor Fidelius flies with Aldrich and Odiana on a litter borne by Knights Heiress. They are traveling for the lands of Aquitaine to visit the High Lord, with the southward winds being unusually favorable. Fidelius regrets that Amara's idealism led her to spurn him and his true fight to save Alera from the dying house of Gaius. He loathes Sextus for delaying the transfer of power to a viable heir, knowing once the First Lord dies, the realm will undoubtedly divide, and the enemies of Alera, the Mara, Icemen of the North, and the Canaan will not hesitate to strike. Fidelius is thus casted in his lot with High Lord Aquitaine, who he deems the strongest and most ruthless option to fill the void of power. Their litter reaches Aquitaine, its main city casting a beautiful, multicolored light on its streets. It is a truly peaceful and idyllic place, almost enough to make Fidelius forget about the sheer power of its High Lord. They are shown into Aquitaine's manor, where many gargoyles line the walls. It is a display of strength, for each one represents Furies trapped in the stone and held there by the will of Aquitaine. Fidelius, Aldrich, and Odiana are led to Aquitaine on his throne, the leonine High Lord holding a goblet of wine while watching a slave girl dance in front of him. Behind Aquitaine is a man introduced as Count Calix of Rhodes. Aquitaine is briefed on the escape of Amara, and then learns Fidelius has sent Aldrich's special force of Windwolves ahead to a staging area instead of the rendezvous point. Aquitaine rises in outrage, and Calix accuses Fidelius of treachery. A cold tension settles over the room, and Fidelius asks for a pen and paper. He writes something down, gives it to Aquitaine, and then again urges the High Lord to accelerate his plans. Calix speaks up once more, advising that the Windwolves instead be sent to Rhodes for the winter. Fidelius then reveals that he has deduced Calix has been sent by Rhodes to assassinate Aquitaine when the campaign begins. He also guesses that the surge in the south winds implies a cursor has been sent to Calderon Valley. Calix is outraged, and draws a blade to attack Fidelius. Aldrich rises to defend the former cursor, and with lightning-quick speed and casual ease, kills Calix in a short duel. The Count's body is searched, and a fury-bound dagger specifically designed to kill Aquitaine is found. Aquitaine, Aldrich, and Odiana then all depart. Fidelius bows to the slave girl still in the room, whose appearance soon changes to one High Lady Invidia Aquitaine. She laughs, and leads Fidelius away to his chambers. In the meantime, evening falls over Calderon Valley. Tavi manages to keep a gap between him and the Mara, but must still find his way home in the midst of a raging storm. He finds a small windfall for cover, but it turns out to be accompanied by several venomous slaves. Tavi slowly backs out, but then hears a cry for help. It doesn't seem to be the Mara, and he turns away from the path home and races away to help. Tavi finds a tall young woman with a slave collar fighting off several Windmane Furies in the storm. Tavi rushes forwards, throwing salt at the Furies to dissipate them. She thanks him, though her leg is wounded. They stagger back into the howling storm, Tavi telling her he knows where to find shelter. Back at Bernard Holt, Brutus finally drops off Bernard at his home. Asana rushes out into the Great Hall to care for her brother. It is already filled with people taking shelter from the storm, but a notable unease and quiet seems to have settled over everyone. Asana races to Bernard, who is still unconscious and bleeding from his wound. To her horror, she also learns Tavi is missing. A large tub is brought down so Asana can heal Bernard with her watercrafting. She learns that the other stadholders seem to be afraid to help her heal her brother, and decides to confront them all. Approaching the stadholders, Asana notices that Cord and his son seem to not be afraid of the storm. She reaches out with Rill, and discovers that Bitten has been subtly fighter-crafting the hall to enhance everyone's fears and anxieties. Asana begins to speak up, but suddenly the air rushes out from her lungs and she collapses. Eric stares at her with a quiet focus, and she realizes Cord has set his son's craftings on her. Cord himself stands over her, a quiet threat in his eyes. Fury then surges through Asana, and she claws at his eyes. She points at the fire where Eric and Bitten are sitting, and the ploy is exposed. The sons try to rise to their feet, but the slave Fade inadvertently trips Bitten and spills hot stew on Eric's face. The spell is broken on the crowd, and a furious Cord attacks Asana. Warner arrives with the sons and defends her. Cord, Bitten, and Eric flee out the hall and into the storm. Asana returns her attention to Bernard, but an older woman named Bit tells her Bernard has died. Meanwhile, Tavi and the slave battle through the storm, running low on salt. Tavi at last sees a flickering of fire in the distance as the Windmanes close in again. A fury strikes Tavi, sending him tumbling away. He falls into mud, inadvertently concealing him from the Windmanes. Tavi gets to his feet and finds a small mound, where a small structure is softly lit by a fire. Still covered in mud, he stumbles into a small domed chamber. It is revealed to be the Princeps Memoriam, an oasis of peace amidst the storm. A cold and exhausted Tabby is found by the slave girl. She is revealed to be the cursor Amara, and she tells Tabby her name but not the true reason why she is in the valley. Tabby tells her the memoriam was the site of the princeps funeral when the heir died fighting the Mara. The crown's Furies will protect them from the storm. He begins to lose consciousness and mumbles incoherently about the fiasco with Bernard and the Mara. Amara is shocked, but Tabby passes out before she can learn more. At the same time, Asana cannot believe Bernard has died. Cursing Cord, she tells the bewildered crowd to get Bernard back in the tub. They caution her that if his body is restored, it is impossible to say if his mind will also be the same. But Asana cannot be dissuaded, and the set holders agree to help her. Using Rill, she is able to detect a faint trace of life still lingering in Bernard. Asana, through her fury, courses throughout Bernard's body, sensing his pain and failing body. Through the strength of her will and her love for Bernard and Tabby, Asana is able to give Bernard the energy and warmth to live again. A warm blackness threatens to overtake her then, but she sees a light flare above her. Asana goes back into the light and returns to the normal world, badly weakened. She worries about Tabby though, who is still alone in the storm. Amara tends to Tabby, impressed by his bravery and caring nature. The pressing problem is both of them are cold and wet, with no prospect of leaving until the storm passes. As Tabby sleeps, Amara thinks back to her mission. She wonders if Gaius had somehow induced the storm on purpose to give his cursor time to rest. Amara also comes to believe that Tabby and his uncle may have run into advanced scouts of the Mara attack force. The only Legion soldiers to defend the valley are stationed at Garrison, and if overrun, the Mara would be able to rampage throughout all of Calderon. An additional wrinkle is that Fidelius will likely continue to pursue her, and may also be somewhere in the valley. Amara steels herself, resolved to carry out her mission. She decides to remain as covert as possible in case Fidelius is searching for her. Amara resupplies herself from convenient caches in the memoriam, undoubtedly the product of Gaius' foresight. She finally comes to terms with Fidelius' betrayal in that moment and begins to quietly cry. Sure enough though, the following day Fidelius, Aldrich, and Odiana are taken to Calderon Valley. Fidelius knows the storm was a distraction created by Gaius to insert Amara into the valley, and warns Aldrich and Odiana the cursor poses a dangerous threat to their plans. The three plan to ride to meet with the delegate from the Mara. They ride on the Crown Causeway, using small Furies in the road to speed up their travel. Then, Fidelius' Fury Eaton warns him of other presences nearby. They move into a clearing, and Fidelius calls out to their watchers. A Marat warrior emerges with the Herdbane, though he is not Osterok, the Marat Fidelius is set out to meet. More Marat are detected on their flanks, and Fidelius acts quickly. He draws a knife and hurls it at the Herdbane, killing it. The lead Marat attacks Fidelius, who deftly counters him. More warriors appear and attack, but are no match for Fidelius, Aldrich, and Odiana. They are all killed. And then another Marat appears. This time it is Osterok, Cho-Vin of his tribe. Osterok reveals he has recently encountered two humans, and brings forth Bernard's sword. To Fidelius' dismay, he learns that while the older man may have died, the younger boy managed to escape the Marat. Osterok furthermore is cautious, wary of the unique powers possessed by Alerans that the Marat do not have. He asks for a totem of the Cho-Vin of Aquitaine from Fidelius, who displays an ornate dagger belonging to the High Lord. Osterok, however, then demands it be handed over to him as repayment for the death of his Chala, the Herdbane killed by Bernard and Tabby. Forced to concede in order to keep the alliance together, Fidelius gives Osterok the dagger. It will effectively trace Aquitaine concretely to the Marat incursion, meaning it is on all of them to make sure the attack is successful. And in order to do that, Fidelius decides they must track down the survivors who saw Osterok and escaped. Meanwhile, Tabby reawakens and tells Amara how he came to find her. She is surprised to hear he has no Furies at all, and Tabby confesses he wishes to attend the Academy of Alera, where crafting is less necessary to succeed rather than in the Legions. He offers Amara food and shelter in Bernardhole, but her ankle is still hurt. With the storm over, the two head back out onto the roads. It is still cold outside, with winter weather looming on the horizon. Then, Bernard himself appears on Brutus. Tabby rushes into his arms, relieved to find his uncle alive. Bernard sternly but gently scolds Tabby, telling him people have been hurt because of his actions. He then turns his attention to Amara, who claims she is a slave, and after some thought allows her to come back with them. They reach Bernard Holt by the afternoon, and are greeted by a young boy named Frederick. Bernard sends Tabby to his room, and Amara nearly collapses from the pain in her ankle. Bernard picks her up and carries her inside. He politely asks her how she hurt herself as Amara in turn asks him about the Mara. Bernard reveals nothing, only warning her another storm is coming. Amara is left alone to rest, but decides to leave her room to talk more with Bernard. He tends to her wounds, but is certain she is lying about being a slave. Bernard does not trust her, and overcome with exhaustion, she falls asleep. Right at that moment, however, Frederick approaches Bernard and tells him there are 3 travelers seeking shelter from the storm. Amara falls asleep, as Fidelius then politely greets Bernard outside. At the same time, Asana awakens and immediately senses something is wrong. She bursts out of her room and finds Bernard, who reassures her Tabby is alright. However, he doesn't remember what happened that day, meaning Tabby is now the only person in the valley who has seen Osterok. Bernard knows the danger that poses, and they must warn Count Graham and Garrison of the threat. Asana then sees Amara asleep in Bernard's bed, and learns of the 3 strangers who have conveniently shown up at the same time as Tabby's fiasco. She tells Bernard to delay the strangers, and then heads to Tabby's room. However, the boy is forlorn and dejected, and offers little conversation. Asana returns to look at Amara. Amara awakens and Asana simply asks her if she is there to take Tabby. Amara replies no, truth ringing in the word and sensed by Asana's powers. Meanwhile, Fidelius turns to Aldrich and Odiana, realizing that Bernard is harboring Amara. He decides they must find the boy who escaped Osterok and then detain him, the stadtholder, and Amara. Bernard presently returns, and Fidelius sends Aldrich and Odiana to the barn under the guise they are newlyweds. After some time, Bernard heads back upstairs. A girl named Berit swings by, and Fidelius charmingly asks her several questions about the stadtholder. He is able to learn about Tabby and his Furyless situation, but Asana then arrives. Fidelius recognizes her as a watercrafter, and it soon becomes clear she does not trust him. Nonetheless, Asana asks him to remove his boots so she can wash his feet as a courtesy. More people begin to fill the Great Hall as the storm picks up in strength. Then, Aldrich bursts in and immediately rushes to Fidelius. He warns him their horses have been cut loose, and Fidelius turns to see Asana running up the stairs with his boots. Furious they have been discovered, Fidelius orders Aldrich to follow Asana and kill Tabby and Amara. Tabby, meanwhile, had continued to sulk on his bed. He is certain now he has lost the trust of Bernard, and will never have his own flock to raise funds to go to the academy. He then hears a soft knock on his window. It turns out to be Amara, who slips in and warns Tabby they must leave immediately. She tells him she is a cursor and agent of the First Lord. It is imperative that Tabby is taken to Garrison to warn them of the Mara incursion, but the arrival of Fidelius, Aldrich, and Odiana means their lives are in danger. Tabby agrees to go with Amara, and as they escape they run into Fade. Fade insists on accompanying them, and they run onto the causeway having let loose the strangers' horses. As they flee, Asana screams out to them, urging them to run. However, after some time, Amara's bad ankle causes her to lag behind. She tells Tabby to continue on, but he refuses to leave her. Amara tells Tabby to head with Fade into the woods, and that she will stay behind to delay their pursuers. So Tabby and Fade press on, using Tabby's knowledge of the land to their advantage. Then suddenly, they are ambushed by Cord, Bitten, and Eric. Cord does not believe Tabby when he tries to warn them about the Mara, and plunges his head into the river to drown him. At the same time, Amara takes to the air and prepares to fight Fidelius, Aldrich, and Odiana, knowing the odds are easily against her. A dark shape moves towards her, and she fires off an arrow but misses. Amara is tackled to the ground, but it turns out to be Bernard. Bernard learns Amara is a cursor, and that she sent Tabby and Fade ahead to Garrison. Asana is also in communication with Bernard via her Fury, heading out to find Tabby. They soon detect Cord's presence, and everyone races to save Tabby, knowing Fidelius' party will also be converging there. Bernard arrives just in time to pull Cord off his nephew. He tells Tabby to run with Fade as Cord and Bitten summon their Furies. Amara and Bernard take on Cord and his sons in an earth-shaking battle, but then Bitten turns his attention to Tabby and Fade. He sends streaks of fire flying at them, and with surprising speed, Fade pushes into Tabby and sends them through the fire and into the river. Tavi drags Fade to the surface, but Odiana's voice suddenly resonates in his head. She tries to lull him into a deathly sleep, but Tavi focuses on overwhelming her senses with powerful emotions. The sensation greatly disturbs Odiana, who briefly releases her control over Tavi. However, Odiana regains her composure and approaches Tavi again, but Asana now appears and rakes a hand across Odiana's face. She tells Tavi to run as Cord and Bernard continue the grapple. Fidelius then enters the fray and fires an arrow at Tavi. It is thrown aside by Amara, and then Aldrich emerges from behind Fidelius. Cord and Eric flee, but Bitten staggers in front of Aldrich and is ruthlessly cut down. A furious Cord attacks Aldrich as the full fury of the storm hits everyone. Tavi grabs Fade and leads him away from the fighting. They make it out of the woods, but are then immediately surrounded by a band of Marat warriors. Back at the scene of the fight, Asana manages to flood the river in a tremendous display of power. The combatants are all unceremoniously separated in the storm. Fidelius manages to drag himself out of the water by woodcrafting a tree branch to hang on to. He reflects on the fight, admitting he underestimated the strength the locals would have with their Furies. Fidelius stumbles to his feet and manages to find Aldrich downstream. The warrior is dangerously close to death from the cold, and there is no sign of Odiana. Fidelius carries Aldrich to a safe area and crafts a shelter and fire for them. Aldrich awakens, and Fidelius tells him he has sensed two separate groups moving in different directions. Aldrich is determined to recover Odiana, but Fidelius manages to convince him to remain focused on the mission. Amara also recovers from the shock of the water and cold, realizing that Asana must have flooded the river. She lays frozen from the cold, but Bernard then finds her and brings her to a shelter with a fire. He thanks her for protecting Tavi, and quietly talks to Amara while she rests against him for body heat. The two kiss, and Amara falls asleep. Later, she awakens to find Bernard standing at the front of the shelter. Coming to his side, Amara sees thousands of crows fill the sky. Ominously, Bernard says the crows can always sense when there is about to be a massive battle. Amara asks him to show her the way to Garrison and get an audience with Count Graham, and after some consideration, he agrees. Elsewhere, Asana is slapped awake. She finds herself in a dirt room surrounded by a ring of fire and smoke. It neutralizes her water crafting, and Asana looks up to see Odiana is also trapped with her. The Water Witch tells her they are captives of Cord, presumably bound for a fate of slavery. Asana cannot call the rill, and fears what the brutish stadholder will do to them. Odiana confides to Asana that her awakening as a watercrafter, when she became more fully aware of everyone's emotions around her, happened when she was taken by a group of slavers as a child. It was a monstrous experience, and then Cord and a dozen men opened the door. Meanwhile, Tavi is escorted by the silent Marat warriors to an unknown destination. He fights to control his fear, and eventually they reach a group of Gargants. This particular group of Marat seems to be bound to Gargants rather than Herdbanes, and their journey continues on the beasts. At some point they stop, and the Marat appear to investigate the scene of a battle. Tavi recognizes their surroundings as Aldo Holt, and sees the bodies of the holders he once knew lying in the snow. A warrior then shows the leader of their procession the heads of a Herdbane and Direwolf. Tavi glares at the Marat leader, who to his surprise speaks Aleran at him. The leader, called Daroga, tells Tavi they are going to a Horto, offering little explanation. They continue on, and Tavi falls asleep before awakening in a tent with Fade. A younger Marat enters the tent, with eyes of swirling color that are markedly different from Daroga's dark brown. The Marat, surprised at Tavi and Fade, draws a dagger. Daroga enters next, revealing the Marat is his whelp Kitai. I am called Daroga. I am the headman of the Sabot Ha, of the Gargant clan. You are Alerans and my prisoners. You are the enemy of the Marat, and we will partake of your strength. Tavi fears this means the Marat will eat him and Fade alive. Daroga assures him he does not want to, but clan chief Astarak wishes otherwise. However, Daroga astutely points out that if Tavi is able to prove that he, and thus Alerans, are not the enemies of the Marat, he and Fade will live. To accomplish this though, a trial must be held before the One. Thus Tavi and Fade are led out before a crowd of hundreds of Marat. Daroga takes a place at the top of a hill, where there is a pool with white stones to sit on. There, Tavi sees a female warrior with dark eyes, and another vicious-looking man with gray eyes. The other male Marat snarls openly at Tavi, who learns he is Skagara of Dragaha and the female is Hashat of Kevrasha. The Horto begins, with Skagara immediately calling for Tavi and Faye to be killed. Surprising everyone though, Tavi steps up and declares his people are not enemies of the Mara. The crowd begins to bubble with tension, but Daroga steps forwards. It is apparent he has no love for Astaroth, and states that if Tavi believes Astaroth is mistaken, he must partake in the trial of blood. Skagara agrees, but asserts that Daroga as the eldest headman present must be Tavi's opponent. Daroga agrees, but turns the tables and announces his heir Katai will take his place. Additionally, the challenge is changed to the Trial of Wits, a move supported by Hashat. Skagara is outraged and withdraws with the rest of his clan. Tavi is bewildered and asks Daroga for clarification. He learns he is to compete against Katai in the Trial of Wits. If he wins, Tavi's claim the Alerans are not enemies of the Mara will have been proven true before the one. Daroga and Hashat will withdraw from Astaroth's planned attack on Garrison, greatly lessening the Mara invasion force. However, Fade fears for Tavi's life, as the slave reveals the trial will take place in the Valley of Trees, otherwise known as the Wax Forest. There, Tavi and Katai will compete to bring back a Blessing of Night to complete the trial. Elsewhere, Fidelius and Aldrich press on towards Garrison. They are having a hard time tracking Bernard, but then they sense two young legionnaires approaching on the road. Fidelius and Aldrich approach the soldiers and play coy. The soldiers turn out to be Warner's sons, on their way to warn Garrison that a Marat has been spotted near their steadhold. Fidelius and Aldrich kill them both, and Fidelius comes to a crucial decision. Every day that passes means there will be more chances they are discovered, and he decides Astaroth's attack must be initiated immediately. Meanwhile, Asana is forced to watch Cord's men attack Odiana. Cord himself looms over her shoulder, hitting Asana when she insults him. The cruel stadholder orders Eric to bring him a box. The boy returns with a plain strip of metal, and Odiana's eyes instantly light up with fear. It is a slave discipline collar, which once placed on their throats will enslave their wills to cords. Odiana puts up a vicious fight, but Cord chokes her unconscious and places the collar on her. He takes drops of both their blood and marks the metal, setting the bond between the two. Odiana convulses in spasms, and Cord departs. Only Eric remains, a troubled look on the boy's face. He quietly begins adding fresh coals to the ring around the two women, and Asana pleads to him. Odiana will need water soon, or she will die. Eric replies that only Cord can take the collar off since it is marked with his blood. Asana then realizes that Warner's daughter was not assaulted by Bitten, but she had instead been sneaking away to see Eric. Eric looks at her in pain, for he knows the monster his father is and could not bear to bring the girl to Courthole. Knowing his own life is at stake, Eric leaves Asana and Odiana. Also on the race to Garrison are Amara and Bernard. They reach the mighty fortress, guarded by legionnaires bearing the banners of Reba. A massive wall stretches across two mountains converging to a V, with a blocky fortress stationed behind the wall. Bernard and Amara approach Garrison from the rear gates facing Calderon Valley. They find two young legionnaires, bored and clearly negligent in their duties. Bernard asks to see Centurion Giraldi or Count Graham, but the two soldiers insult him and Amara. Bernard punches one and knocks him out, and the other guard races away. He returns with a centurion and an older man, a healer named Harger. Bernard is on familiar terms with Harger, who pays little heed to the unconscious guard on the ground. Harger reveals Graham is indisposed at the moment, and then a Revan officer approaches them with an air of arrogance. Pluvis Pentius issues an order to arrest Bernard and Amara, and refuses to let them see Graham. Then, Graham himself arrives, having been retrieved by Harger. Bernard warns the Count the Mara are bound to attack Garrison, and urges him to send warning to nearby Reva. Graham stirs the fortress into action, but then Syrah sends a faint warning to Amara. She scans around them, and then sees a faint rippling in the air nearby. Upon Syrah's inspection, she sees three men with drawn swords. They immediately attack, going for Bernard and Amara. Amara manages to dance away, but Bernard slips and falls. Graham steps in front of him and sends a blast of fire at the incoming Knight's heiress. The other enemy knight is knocked down, but the one remaining throws a knife at Amara. Bernard drags her out of the way, but it flies past them and hits Graham in the lower back. Graham falls, and an outraged Pluvis asserts his authority and arrests Bernard and Amara on charges of murder and treason. As time passes in Courthold, Asana cradles Odiana, vowing to help her escape from their hellish captivity. Cord's fury circles them, ensuring the women don't try to escape the Ring of Coals. Asana is dangerously dehydrated, and after some time Eric brings them some water. He haphazardly throws out more coals, remarking how it is starting to snow outside. Cord and his men return, and Cord orders Eric to tar the roof while they eat. He leaves, and Eric glances at Asana, mentioning the snow again before heading to the roof. Asana waits for a while, and then hears Eric above her. She sees a dagger stab through the roof several times, and then water begins to trickle through the ceiling. Asana fills up her cups again, satiating her and Odiana's thirst. She notices the coals spread sloppily by Eric have left gaps in the ring, and is also finally able to reach Rill again. Odiana, however, worries the collar will prevent her from disobeying Cord's will, especially if he speaks to her. To get around this, Asana uses Rill to burst Odiana's eardrums. Cord and his men then burst in. Asana is able to channel her crafting and floods the ring of coals, creating boiling steam. She creates a plank of liquid for the women to walk on and avoid Cord's fury. Odiana and Asana make it out of the smokehouse and flee to the nearest stream, as Cord orders his men and hounds to hunt them down. Meanwhile, Fidelius learns the Knight's Heiress assassins were unsuccessful. It is also revealed that the appointment of the inexperienced Plutus was the result of machinations by Fidelius. Presently, he and Aldrich fly out with the litter to the plains past the mountains of Calderon. There they see countless campfires, the Marat horde readying for its devastating attack on Garrison. Fidelius must find Osterok and restore the Marat's confidence that the battle will be a success. Their litter lands at the bottom of a hill where a Horto is being held. Fidelius and Aldrich are shown to Osterok, who has a young and still alive Aleran woman before him as prisoner. He learns Osterok had sent a raiding party before the main attack, and the Mara are presently celebrating their victory. They are partaking in the strength of the Aleran defenders and are eating their hostages alive. Fidelius counsels Osterok to move on Garrison immediately as the girl pleads for him to help her. After some consideration, Osterok agrees to move the attack to dawn. Fidelius is relieved, and then breaks the prisoner's neck out of mercy. At the same time, Tavi is led out of the tent by Daroga. Snow is falling, which the headman says may induce more of the mysterious Keepers of the Silence to sleep. Tavi learns he is to retrieve the Blessing of Night, a mushroom that grows in a tree at the center of the Valley of Silence. It is supposedly a Marat wonder drug, but is protected by the venomous Keepers. Katai is also en route, but is traveling with Hashat of the Horse Clan. Tavi rides with Daroga on his Gargan to a steep cliff face with a pit below. Peering over the edge, Tavi sees a knotted valley of trees, all of which seem to be glowing with a faint luminescence. Indeed, it seems as if a bubbly wax has been laid over the forest. Daroga tells him the glowing substance is called the Croach, which will break under too heavy of a weight. Hashat then arrives, with Katai glaring at Tavi through the snow. The two tribe heads tell them the rules of the trial, and then give them rope to rappel down to the bottom of the pit. Tavi bids farewell to Fade, who tells him to be smart and careful before giving him his pack. Both youths descend towards the bottom, but Katai then pulls out a knife and begins to cut through Tavi's rope. Tavi throws a piece of cheese from the pack at Katai as he frantically tries to make it to the bottom before the rope breaks. He is a little too late, and falls some 10 feet to the ground. Tavi finds the forest to be surprisingly warm and humid, and before him is the ground covered by the strange alien Croach. Katai then also jumps down, not knowing where Tavi has landed. Furious, Tavi rushes Katai and lands a punch to the ribs. After a brief scuffle though, both then notice some drying green wax on Tavi's boots. He has broken the Croach, meaning the Keepers of the Forest will soon come. Katai's eyes go wide with fear, and Tavi learns that mysteriously, the Croach layer seems to be thinner than normal. Then, a Keeper emerges from the dark of the forest. It resembles a large spider, and approaches a nearby crow trapped in the Croach. It seals a new layer of wax, and then bobs up and down and chirps in the air. Katai warns Tavi to remain silent, and guides him away from the spider. The two move in overly exaggerated, graceful motions away from the spider. Closest they are, Tavi can sense an almost feverish heat emanating from Katai. Katai whispers they must continue the trial, and Tavi finally inspects Fade's pack. he finds 2 jars of lamp oil, various fire-starting materials, and a heavy curved knife. Katai then signals for them to stop, for 2 keepers lie ahead of them. They begin to bob and chirp, a sound that eerily echoes from many other places deeper in the forest. Tabby watches one of the keepers' eyes swivel back and forth. Suddenly, it locks onto them, eyes going from white to bright orange. The spider begins to whistle loudly and barrels after Katai. An idea comes to Tabby's mind as the 2 race away from the incoming spiders. He rummages through his pack as they run. They find a small pool of dark water, and Tabby then stomps around the croach, deliberately breaking it. He pours the lamp oil and uses some firestones to ignite a fierce flame. Tabby grabs Katai and drags them both into the pool, which is shockingly cold. The spiders close in on them, but are drawn to the flame and not Tabby and Katai. Tabby realizes the spider's sight is based on heat. He gives Katai a water-soaked blanket to cover up, in the process realizing Katai is a girl around his age. The 2 wait in the pool for the spiders to disperse. Tabby realizes that he must beat the trial in this attempt, for Garrison and his family do not have the time to wait for him to try again. He resolves to retrieve the blessing of the night rather than escape, bewildering Katai. Tabby also proposes that if he and Katai come back with the blessing, it may work as an effective loophole to save both their lives. They agree to work together, and covered in their wet blankets sneak close to the tallest tree in the forest. There is a large opening inside, and the keepers remain seemingly oblivious to them. Tabby notices the spiders seem to be taking something into the tree, and wonders if they are feeding a queen of some sort. Then Katai, having taken a different route, triggers another fire some distance away. Countless keepers swarm out of the tree, leaving it empty. Tabby is able to sneak inside, and finds a cluster of mushrooms at the bottom of a glowing mound. The mound pulsed with greenish light, and Tabby thought he could see the shadow of something dark, something slender within. Tabby picks 2 mushrooms, but the glowing mound before him seems to move. Shocked, he inadvertently flinches and pricks his hand on spikes below the mushroom caps. Little drops of blood spill out, and by ill fortune fall on the mound. It begins to pulsate and move, the blood sinking deep inside. A slow unwinding of limbs, languid, liquid, as though from a sleeper that had, after an endless passing of seasons, finally awakened. It moved, and Tabby felt its movement, felt a vast, bewildering awareness that swept over him like the gaze of some ancient and horrible beast. All other thoughts escape Tabby's mind, and he turns and flees from the tree. As he runs, he takes a quick look back and briefly sees a tall, foreboding alien figure that he can somehow feel. Tabby reunites with Katai and urges her to run, abandoning all sense of caution. They light another fire to cover their escape, and Tabby gives her one of the blessings. But amidst the shrieks of the spiders, there sounds a deeper whistle, one that seems more powerful and profound. Tabby and Katai make it back to the ropes, but a dark, chitinous mass falls out of one of the trees and attacks Katai. Mandibles sink into her leg, and she begins to scream. Daroga peers over the cliff edge and yells for Tabby to climb up, believing Katai cannot be saved. But Tabby cannot bring himself to abandon her, and as keepers swarm in, he draws Vade's knife. Tabby attacks the strange creature, which has retreated back into the tree. He confronts it, remarking how it seems to be clumsy, almost as if newly born. Tabby grabs a flaming branch and defends Katai. He takes her prone body and retreats back to the ropes. The creature paces around Tabby as Daroga catches on to his plan. The headman vanishes for a moment and returns carrying a massive boulder. In an unreal feat of strength, Daroga hurls it at the creature, clipping it as it takes to the air. The creature retreats, but then Katai grabs Tabby and tells him it is too late. Her eyes close, but Tabby refuses to let her go. He takes his blessing of night and pulls out the spikes. Tabby crushes it and drips some liquid into her wound, and force feeds the rest to Katai. Her eyes suddenly open. Their gazes lock, and Tabby freezes. Tabby found himself staring down at the girl, suddenly aware of her, entirely aware of her in a way he had never been aware of anyone before. He could feel the surge of blood in her veins, the fear and regret and confusion that filled her thoughts. Those cleared as her eyes focused on him, widened, and Tabby realized that she had felt his own presence in the same way. When Tabby blinked the tears away, his eyes returned to hers. only to find not opalescent swirls of subtle, shifting color, but wide pools of deep emerald green, eyes as green as his own. A stunned Katai passes out, and the moment passes. Daroga and Hashat pull them onto the cliff, and Hashat then stares at them incredulously. They ask Tavi if he has retrieved the blessing. He looks down at his pack, and finds that Katai has put her blessing in there for him as gratitude. It saves him from certain death, and Daroga thanks Tavi for saving Katai's life and sacrificing his own blessing. He declares that a debt must be repaid to Tavi for protecting his family, and pulls him to his feet. Meanwhile, Bernard and Amara are thrown into cells by Pluvis's men. Amara finally tells Bernard the story of Fidelius's betrayal of the Cursors. They kiss several more times before breaking apart. Then a bell sounds, signaling a changing of the guard. The door opens and Harger enters carrying a very much sleeping Pluvis. He is accompanied by Centurion Giraldi, who is familiar with Bernard. Giraldi believes Bernard's warnings of the Mara invasion, but cautions him Pluvis's charges of treason are very serious. As Bernard is no longer on his steadhold, he technically does not have the rights of a citizen. Consequently, he technically cannot issue orders to Giraldi to organize a defense, as Graham is still alive but incapacitated. Amara then steps up, stating she is a former cursor and that Gaius Sextus has granted her the honorary rank of Countess. It is a blatant lie, but a necessary one to give her the same command authority as Graham. Giraldi takes it in stride, and tells Amara she must get Knight Commander Perellus on her side. He is a formidable swordsman and will convince the other Centurions to follow her in the defense of Garrison. Pluvis is unceremoniously thrown into a cell for the time being, meaning they also technically are committing mutiny. Amara readies herself and heads to the barracks to find Perellus. The commander and his men are there gambling and consorting with women, but Amara cuts through their bravado and finds Perellus himself. Perellus eyes her up and down, skeptical of her authority and refusing to be bossed around. Amara slaps him and pulls out her sword, threatening him with Juris Mocto if he does not follow her orders. Perellus would undoubtedly win the duel, but would also be guilty of treason if he kills Amara, a cursor of the crown. Perellus concedes to Amara's authority, and the Knights of Garrison are readied for battle. The fortress prepares for the massive Mara attack. Amara stands sometime later on the walls alongside Perellus and Giraldi, who will take command once the battle begins. A hurried Bernard then returns from a scouting run, and warns them that 10,000 Mara of the Wolf and Herdbane clans are en route. He asks to be armed and to help in the defense. Perellus is reluctant to have a man of civilian status on the walls, but after some convincing, Bernard and Amara are allowed to stay. The legionnaires are stationed on the walls that will bear the brunt of the Mara assault. Perellus and his knights, with the advantage of their Furies, will serve as the trump card of the Aleran force. Their main goal will be to kill the Horde Master to hopefully break the enemy army. The initial Mara attack begins, consisting of Wolf Clan warriors, and a wave of Aleran arrows slams into the front runners. But the Mara numbers are great, and the Horde presses on. Poles are launched against the walls, countered by legionnaires with spears. It is Amara's first action in battle, the noise and blood initially taking her off guard. She tries to keep an eye out for the Horde Master, but spots nothing. Perellus signals his knights, and 3 men rise above the battlements and send a wave of fire against the Horde. They use massive fire pots to start the blaze, and strong gusts of air to send the flames rushing over the attackers. The Mara closest to the blaze are incinerated, and the rest fall back. Garrison has repelled the first vicious assault, but Bernard warns they have only faced the youngest Mara warriors thus far. Casualties are light for the Aleran defenders, with Perellus having only sustained a light cut that bleeds into his eye. Amara is worried, for there has been no sign of the Rogue Legion and its knights. The horn sounds again, for a second wave is now approaching the walls. This time, however, the Mara do not use poles, but simply jump to the top of the wall. It is the Herdbane clan, and the new tactic takes the defenders by surprise. Fighting erupts on top of the walls, and then Perellus enters the fray. The master metalcrafter cuts a deadly trail through the Mara and single-handedly clears the wall. However, the enemy knights then arrive, and Amara looks up to see dozens of Knights Errors locked in deadly airborne duels. She sees more litters carrying doubtless more Fury crafters bearing a course directly for Perellus and his own knights. Amara takes to the air and lashes out with Cirrus at one of the litters. The litter loses its balance and spills open, but several knights errants close in on Amara. She manages to escape and warns Bernard and Perellus of the incoming knights. The litter swoop down, and Amara sees Fidelius and Aldrich X Gladius enter the fighting. An enemy crafter detonates the fire pots on the walls, and fire sweeps over Perellus and his knights. Fidelius approaches the wood gates and seems to concentrate for a moment before withdrawing. Then, the Marat herdbanes break through the walls, and the horde breaches the walls of garrison. The battle quickly takes a terrible turn for the Alerans as the Marat pour into garrison. Amara tries to get a dazed Perellus to his feet and joins the frantic defense on the ground. She is wounded fighting off several warriors but is found by Harger. Amara takes the healer to Perellus, who becomes revitalized and rises to his feet. He immediately rejoins the fighting, rallying legionnaires as Bernard and Amara fight beside him, but Perellus is struck in the side of the knee with a spear. He fights on, but the defenders are rapidly becoming overwhelmed. Amara orders Harger to take her to the unconscious Graham. She asks the healer to reawaken him despite the risk to his health. Graham is told only Perellus remains of his knights, and the Count then asks Amara to get a torch. Graham reaches into the flame, and then orders Amara to bring the torch to the front of the battle before all the Mara. He also firecrafts her, enhancing her anxiety and fear in the battle intentionally. In an act of great bravery, and with the help of Bernard, Amara ascends to the battlements and holds the torch above her head. It suddenly alights, also magnifying Amara's fear across the Marat below. The attackers succumb to the same fear by the power of firecrafting and flee garrison. Graham risks his life to give the Alerans a costly victory against the second Marat charge. A full 2/3 of the defending force has been lost, and only Perellus and 2 of the knights remain. The gates are broken, and as the sun rises, the full numbers of the Marat horde catch the eyes of the defenders. It is not 10,000, but more than 5 times that number. Elsewhere, Asana and Odiana stumble onto a causeway and by chance come across the people of Bernardhold. They learn of the attack on garrison, and that the other stadtholders of the area have decided to join the battle there. Asana and a subdued Odiana join their caravan, which soon reaches garrison. Centurion Giraldi greets them, and agrees to let the male holders help, as they can provide some crafting strength. Bernard joyously reunites with Asana, but they both still have no idea where Tabby is. Asana devises a plan to strengthen the fortress walls, but the head Legion engineer doubts the holders have the power to pull it off. Amara intervenes and allows the holders to try the plan. Asana returns to Odiana, who for her safety has been stowed away in a warehouse. However, the door suddenly closed behind them. It is Cord, who has also fled to garrison for safety and now sees an opportunity for revenge. Outside, Bernard and the Legion engineer gather the holders of all ages for an attempt to raise the fortress walls. Amara meets with Perellus, who knows they are still hopelessly outnumbered. The commander's knee is still hurt, but with his metal crafting he is able to ignore the pain. Amara ventures outside the walls, gazing upon the massive horde waiting to attack again. Fidelius's voice then drifts up to her, for one of his knights is crafting his voice so she can hear. Fidelius with certainty states garrison will fall, and tells Amara that if she leaves with the women and children, he will delay the Marat long enough so she can escape. Amara is silent for a long moment, but then the walls of the fortress behind her groan. She turns and sees them, inexplicably, growing higher and wider before her eyes. Spikes burst out at the tops. It is a tremendous, powerful feat of crafting by the local holders, and the defenders of garrison erupt into cheers. Amara spits at Fidelius's offer and returns to the battlements. Despite the revitalized defenses, the fact remains that the enemy knights vastly outnumber their own, and they have no idea where they will come from. Amara orders for the holders to scatter hay on the courtyard, and she and the other commanders learn one of the warehouses has already been locked and secured. Then, the Marat begin to charge again. They are met with another storm of Aleran arrows, woodcrafters firing at a range of nearly 600 yards. But the horde moves like an unstoppable tide with sheer numbers, and closes in on the walls. Amara tries to keep an eye out for the horde master, but cannot spot anything of note in the chaos. Perellus takes point at the defense of the main gate, and Amara then sees litters of enemy knights swooping in again. She triggers her trap, where she and Bernard have hidden several dozen holder bowmen in the courtyard. Hidden by hay, the archers spring up and ambush the litters, targeting the knights heiress. Several litters lose control, but enemy knights manage to make landfall and attack the archers. Battle erupts in the courtyard, and Amara rushes to find Perellus. She warns him that enemy knights have broken in as she spots Fidelius firing arrows at them. Bernard is exhausted, as it was his woodcrafting that had concealed the archers. Aldrich X Gladius then closes in on the shield wall holding the gate, slaughtering the defenders with ease. Perellus appears on the opposite side of the fray, rallying the garrison soldiers against the mercenaries. Aldrich gives orders for his men to fall back, but he himself does not retreat. Instead, he stands and faces Perellus, the two master swordsmen readying for a titanic duel. "My name is Perellus of the Black Blade, and I'm the man who will end your career. Never heard of you, kid. You're not a Rarus." The swordsmen clash in a blur of steel, striking and parrying and countering with blinding speed. They quickly separate, both unwounded. However, from underneath Perellus's helmet a slow dribble of blood begins to fall towards his eye. His wound from earlier has reopened, but the duel continues. Aldrich begins to drive Perellus back, but the Knight Commander is no slouch and scores a blow that draws blood on Aldrich's midsection. The clash continues, but then blood falls into Perellus's eye again. He quickly shakes his head, but it is all the opening Aldrich needs. He surges inside Perellus's guard and kicks his wounded knee, breaking the leg. Perellus stumbles to a knee and throws a last strike, but Aldrich parries it and decapitates Perellus. Amara looks on in horror, the greatest defender of garrison dead before her eyes. She races to Giraldi as the barricades begin to break again. The Centurion learns of Perellus's death, but reveals he has finally spotted the Marat Hordemaster. Amara windcrafts to catch a view of Osterok, in the process seeing the signet dagger of High Lord Aquitaine on the Marat's hip. She must recover the dagger to warn Gaius, and knows this was why Fidelius had tried to convince her, and only her, to leave the battle. However, in the horizon, another Marat horde is spotted. It is just as big as the first, meaning the Alerans' fight is hopeless. Amara runs back to Bernard, telling him she will fly to take out Osterok and recover the dagger. The Marat attackers break into the courtyard, Osterok himself entering the battle. A massive roar then erupts near the walls, which come tumbling down. Another Marat warrior atop a gargant, wielding a massive cudgel, enters the courtyard and kills a Wolf Clan warrior. Osterok of Herdbane, Daroga of Gargant calls you mistaken before we the Marat. Come out, you murderous dog. Come and face me before the One. Daroga of Gargant challenges Osterok to a trial of blood as the courtyard falls still, and Tabby sits behind him with Fade, waving to a bewildered Bernard. Elsewhere, Asana leads Odiana away from Cord, knowing no help will come for them in the warehouse. Cord moves forwards with a slave collar for Asana. The warehouse door suddenly shakes, and Asana breaks her fury lamp. Darkness envelops them, and Asana drags Odiana away from Cord and his fury. They hide in a row of crates, the sounds of battle from outside emanating in. Asana leads him away from Odiana, tracking Cord through his surging emotions. To further provoke him, she tells Cord how Eric helped them escape. Cord becomes enraged, and Asana is able to sense his exact location. She pushes a crate over from up high, and the pile falls onto Cord. Asana races to the door and opens it. She looks back to see Cord laying on the ground, his legs, hip, and back broken. Asana declares Cord will face trial for his crimes, and helps Odiana to her feet. The Water Witch flees into the battle, and Asana then sees Tavi with Daroga. Tavi himself looks out at the courtyard, eyeing Osterok and his warriors. He gets off the Gargant with Fade and reunites with Bernard and Asana. Preparations begin for the duel, and Hashat and Skagara also enter the courtyard. The morning sun rises, and Daroga and Osterok begin the duel. It is a close fight, with the entire Marat horde waiting on the outcome to determine whether the attack will continue. Osterok lunges forwards with a spear, but Daroga sidesteps it and strikes Osterok in the belly with its butt, winding the Herdbane headman. Osterok continues his attack, trying to kick Daroga in the chest. Daroga easily counters and breaks Osterok's leg. They begin to grapple on the ground, but Tavi then sees Skagara draw a bow with a poisoned arrow. He cries out to warn Daroga, who rolls away. Osterok draws Aquitaine's dagger and breaks free, screaming at the horde to attack. Daroga charges him, but is shot in the arm by Skagara. Hashat immediately whips around and kills Skagara, and battle begins in the courtyard again around the fallen Daroga. Fade begins to drag Tavi away, and Amara screams they must get the dagger. Tavi slips away from Fade and rushes towards Osterrock. A gust of wind throws up hay all around the courtyard, and Tavi then sees several knights descend towards Osterrock. Fidelius is among them and mercilessly kills Osterrock. The dagger falls out of his hand and bounces towards Tavi, who picks it up and runs. He weaves throughout the courtyard as enemy knights chase after him. By chance, he encounters Frederick, who manages to fight off 2 Knights Errant to save Tavi. A Marat warrior slams into him, but Frederick pulls him off, yelling at Tavi to run. Tavi staggers back into the courtyard and manages to find Hashat, who drags him onto her horse. She tells him Daroga has been taken to safety, and Tavi asks her to help Frederick by the stables. Hashat takes Tavi back to the walls and returns to the fight. He reunites with Bernard and Fade. Amara runs up to them and warns Garrison is still in danger of falling. A legionnaire is shot beside them, and Amara recognizes the arrows. It is Fidelius, doubtless still hunting Tavi for the dagger. The ex-cursor himself is then dropped off on the wall in front of them, as well as the towering Aldrich. Bernard rushes forwards, but after a quick exchange, Aldrich stabs him in the side and he falls down to the courtyard. Amara lunges at Aldrich with windcrafted aided speed, Tavi and Fade hiding behind a shield. They are powerless to help as Aldrich disarms Amara and cuts her belly. He knocks her to the ground and stomps on her broken arm. Tavi then grabs a fallen sword and stabs at Aldrich. He distracts the swordsman, but the sword is easily batted away. Aldrich raises his blade for a killing blow, but another blade reaches out and stops it cold. Fade stood over Tavi, both hands on the hilt of the short blade, his legs spread out wide, knees bent, his body relaxed. Fade's sword whips out and cuts Aldrich's face. He falls back, looking like he's seen a ghost. Fade moves forwards with a cool, steady precision, matching Aldrich blow for blow. He drives Aldrich back, displaying a nimbleness Tavi didn't think was possible from the Steadhold simpleton. Fade's strikes slash at the stones around Aldrich like lightning, but Aldrich lands a cut to Fade's wrist that disarms him. However, the ground around Aldrich crumbles away, and he is sent crashing to the courtyard below. Tavi stares at Fade in awe, but then Fidelius appears and throws a rope over Fade's head. He pulls Fade over the edge, the noose tightening. Fidelius attacks Tavi and throws him to the ground. He strangles Tavi, who begins to lose his grip on Aquitaine's dagger. Then Amara stirs and throws a knife that hits Fidelius in the back. Fidelius gasps, grabbing the hilt of the dagger. He stumbles, and Tavi pulls on his belt to send him falling down to the courtyard. Amara crawls next to him, and they hide under the shield, and Tavi cries until he passes out. The whole while, Asana has watched the battle unfold from the second floor of a barracks window. She sees Tavi hide with Amara, but is trapped in the building besieged by Marat. She finds Frederick fighting a valiant defense of the doorway with a spade. Asana asks Frederick to help Tavi and Bernard with her, and they head outside. However, they witness Steadholder Warner be killed by herdbanes, and then the screams of children. Asana and Frederick pivot to save the children from several incoming Marat, and Frederick is left to protect them. Asana runs through the ravaged courtyard, a melee of Alerans and Marat locked in deadly combat. She finds the broken part of the wall and discovers Bernard. However, his wound is closed, and he seems to be alive. Miraculously, Fade also rises, also somehow alive. Asana then looks up to see Odiana, who gestures for her to come to the battlements. She finds Tavi and Amara also alive. Odiana has saved them all, as repayment for Asana sparing her from the Alerans and rescuing her from Cord. Odiana disappears into the battle, and relief washes over Asana. Fade put a hand on Asana's shoulder, silently. He is brave, like his father. Sometime later, Fidelius also awakens to find Odiana over him. She tells him Aldrich is alive, and though they are trapped in Garrison still, Fidelius has managed to acquire the dagger. Garrison is in ruins, though the enemy Marat clans have been driven away. Odiana then walks over to a body, which turns out to be a barely alive Cord. Aldrich forces him to remove Odiana's slave collar, finally freeing her. She then drops scalps of Horse Clan Marat warriors, for the Gargant and Horse clans are presently flushing out buildings. When they find Cord with the scalps, they will tear him apart and eat him alive. Fidelius, Odiana, and Aldrich depart, and as they leave, several Marat rush inside behind them. Tavi awakens back home in Bernardhold. Amara visits him and tells him his actions have saved countless lives. The First Lord himself is even coming to Calderon, and Amara then departs upstairs, conspicuously with Bernard. Asana comes to Tavi's bedside, and he asks her about Aurorus Valerian. He learns he was one of Prince Septimus's bodyguards, but Asana firmly asserts Aurorus died in battle 15 years ago. Doroga then enters with Katai, and thanks Tavi for saving his life in the duel. Katai glares at Tavi with disdain, and then grudgingly also thanks him. She storms out as Doroga laughs. He departs, and then Fade enters. He has readopted the facade of a simpleton, but winks at Tavi and gives him the sword he had used in the duel with Aldrich. Another stranger enters the room and dismisses Fade. He stares at Tavi with green eyes and introduces himself as Gaius Sextus, First Lord of Alera. Sextus thanks Tavi for his heroism, and then tells him he may ask for any award of his choosing. Without hesitation, Tavi asks for the holders and their families to be given aid for the upcoming winter. Sextus seems to be momentarily surprised, but agrees. He then offers Tavi his patronage to attend the academy, a gesture that moves Tavi to tears. Elsewhere, Fidelius recovers in the manners of Aquitaine. He takes a bath and is visited by Lady Aquitaine, who praises him for recovering the dagger. Fidelius worries their affair will be discovered, but the High Lady crafts a vision for him. It is Lord Aquitaine in bed with another woman, revealed to be First Lady Gaius Caria. The following day, the First Lord of Alera hosts an award ceremony for the heroes of the battle, Amara at his side. He praises Frederick for defeating 2 enemy knights with a spade and protecting the children from the Marat. Stunning everyone, Gaius knights Frederick, dubbing him a citizen of Alera. Stadtholder Bernard is also granted the title of Count of Calderon, succeeding Graham, who as it turns out survived the battle. Graham himself is now a lord in the Amaranth Vale, and Bernard will serve as an important point of contact between Alera and the Marat. Gaius Sextus also personally thanks Doroga, who rides away with the sullen Katai. Asana then steps up, stating she was only ever concerned with the safety of her nephew Tavi. Gaius nods and then dubs her a stadtholder. She is the first appointed female stadtholder in Aleran history, and is well deserving of the title. Gaius then calls forth Tavi, but the boy does not appear. After some confusion, Bernard then spots his nephew in the distance. A wry smile is fought off by Amara, for she knows exactly what Tavi is doing. And so the First Lord of Alera, surrounded by subjects, citizens, and knights of the realm, watched in silence while Tavi drove home Dodger's little flock of ewes and lambs, the shaggy-haired Fade loping along behind him.